In this lesson, we're going to talk about buying forges. So buying versus building. We'll also talk about building them. But my main focus is going to be on purchasing materials and then purchasing ready-made forges, and which one is going to be the most cost-effective over time. So this is my opinion on the matter. You're welcome to disagree with me. But yeah, so we'll just talk about kind of how I see stuff. So my recommendation out of the gate, if you've got, we'll say, $300 to $400, is to go ahead and purchase a small gas forge. And the reason I say that, I know that might be some dismay at that, since it's a DIY course. The reason I say that is that the amount of time you can spend building something and putting it together, and the risk you're going to take, can outweigh the cost of buying something that's made to manufacturer's specifications that you could have at your door within a couple of days. So you've got to weigh these two things. How much is my time worth on one side, and am I up for the challenge and the risk involved in building something when there are ready-made forges out there? Okay, so three companies I refer to when it comes to ready-made forges. There's NC Tool Company, which you'll probably remember that name from the Anvil videos. They also make forges. They're a full-service farrier supplier down in North Carolina. And the first forge I ever owned, after I first learned how to do this, was an NC Tool Company double burner forge. And I love that thing. The only reason I got rid of it, and I got it used for about $225, the only reason I got rid of it is because I was driving it all across the country for my job before I became a blacksmith, which was fighting fire for the Forest Service. And that forge cube, there's no way to pack it smaller. So I ended up needing that room in the car that I was driving, and I sold it to a guy that was extremely happy to have that piece of equipment. So NC Tool Company, that's the first recommendation. Their forges generally run between upper 300s to in the 600 range, and that typically has to do with the size of the forge and the number of burners. So 1 up to 5 or even 6 sometimes. My recommendation is you don't go above 2 burners. It's kind of overkill for what you're going to be doing. Okay, so again, NC Tool Company, upper 300s, $400 to 600, 700, somewhere in there. Okay, for a very similar forge that's a little more compact, that's 2 burners and less expensive, okay, I will go with Majestic Forge out of Ohio. And I actually just bought one of these a couple weeks ago. I called them up to see what their turnaround time was on I think it was a Wednesday, and this is around a little before 2 p.m. He said if you order it by 2 p.m. we'll have it out by 3. And good gravy, they had it out by 3 that day. I had it a couple days later, all packed nicely, one little box with everything all inside the main chamber of that forge. And we'll go through that forge here in a second. So for that one, it costs $325, and then about $50 to ship it from Ohio to Indiana. So not too bad. $377 somewhere in there with tax. Pretty good deal for a forge that's gotten things hot enough to do our axe class. So I mentioned that before. And that high carbon steel in those axe bits, or those billets that we turn into the axe bits, that needs to be worked very hot. And the nice thing about these Majestic forges is that they have a smaller chamber, so they'll retain that heat, and they're really well insulated. A little bit better actually than the Forge Master here behind me. So that's definitely probably my number one recommendation if you're going on the more economy side of it, the more budget side. So with that, we'll move on to the Forge Master. If you've ever been to class with me in here, you probably used this one. It's a big beast of a forge, and it gets nice and hot. It's got a lot of area inside of it, so you can work a lot of pieces at a time, which is something I like to do, just to be efficient. But it's also on the more expensive end of things. Stand by. So brand new, this one's about $850, so not cheap. The shipping, depending on where you buy it, if you go with Centaur Forge, it's still underneath that 149-pound shipping barrier. We'll ship it for $14. So not too bad, but $850 out of the box. A bit much if you're just getting into this, if you're trying to do it in a budget-friendly way. The main benefit of this guy is that you can fit stuff in it. It has the front bay door here, so you can open that up, see what's going on. It's got 2 vents on the sides, so one on either side. You can peek in without opening the front door to see how hot stuff is. And it's got those valves on the side, so you can control where your heat's coming from. So my top recommendation again is to go on the more budget-friendly side, and then if you need something larger, or if you want to try out another company down the road, I would start off with the Majestic. Okay, so again, that's about $325 and maybe $50 or so for shipping, depending on where you are in the country. It's definitely going to be more depending on where you are in the world. So definitely want to include you folks who are overseas. There may be some company in your home country that does forges. These are U.S. based forge companies, so I want you to keep that in mind. So Majestic, probably the top choice. We'll hold off there. I'll come back with another section and we'll talk about building forges out. Thanks.